You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today we're going to be talking about why your husband can't change. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating the sometimes stormy seas of life with in laws while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the main reasons why your husband feels like he can't change, or maybe why you feel like your husband can't change. And here's the thing. I think you actually can change. I think everybody who has the desire to change can. I think God gave us that ability to make changes in our lives if we are willing to put in the work to do it. But sometimes it can be really, really hard. One of the reasons why it can be very, very hard has to do with what I'm going to be talking about today, and that is neural pathways. What in the world is that? Now, before I go any further, I want you to know that I'm just passing along information that I learned about 4 or 5 years ago. And I am not a neurologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a neuropathways expert. I'm not anything that ends with IST. I'm just a wife like you who is on a journey learning about all the ways that we are affected by the toxicity of marrying into a crazy, demanding, controlling, challenging in-law dynamic. So neural pathways are actual physical pathways in our brains that our thoughts travel on. That was revolutionary to me when I discovered that our thoughts can actually be physical things. They can actually cause physical change inside our brains. And when we are being raised in our families, certain things become actual pathways. And these are the things like learning basic hygiene. It can be things like how to brush your teeth, how to bathe. It can be things like getting up in the morning and making your bed. It can also be things like mom is mad, she is punishing me by being silent. It can mean that mom or dad uses scriptures to control me in the name of God, and so God is probably trying to control me too. So these kinds of things can have very, very long lasting effects because of those neural pathways. I like to think of established neural pathways versus creating new ones like you're walking through the woods. You're on a hike and you come across this path and you can tell that maybe it's a path. You know that there's a shorter way to go to wherever it is you're trying to get, but there's lots of weeds, there's branches that are down, there's poison ivy maybe, it's very overgrown, and it just doesn't look like a really easy way to get there. And then beside it is the path that everybody else takes. It's the path that is clear. It's marked. There's no weeds. There's no tree branches in the way. It is well worn. You can see where to go, and it's easy sailing down that path. The neural pathways that are established in our brains, they're like the easy path. And our brains want to conserve energy. So anytime a situation comes up, let's say the example I gave where you're being silent and maybe you are not feeling good, and your husband immediately thinks, this is just like mom. This is just like dad. Her silence is punishment. I must have done something wrong. I don't know what I did. I'm being punished because they're being quiet, and I got to figure out what I need to do to fix it. When really, you're just sick and you don't feel like talking. But his thoughts are going to go down the well-traveled path. They're going to go down the easy path. And what they're going to have to do over time is go through the brambles, the weeds, the fallen down branches, the hard path, and establish a new one to have new thoughts that say, okay, my wife is just sick. Just because she's quiet doesn't mean that I've done anything wrong, that she's trying to punish me. No, she just doesn't feel good. But that's hard and it's work. There may be a lot of things like that in your relationship, and maybe you're not really aware of them because this is new to you. And so I hope that this is opening your eyes to some possibilities and allowing you a chance to talk with your husband about how he was raised, how things were in his home, how his parents punished him or dealt with certain things. Like, did he get grounded for just trying to speak up and say what the truth was from his perspective, but it was considered talking back? And so he was shut down and just grounded. Like, oh no, you're talking back. Even if he's just trying to explain it, shut down, you're talking back, you're grounded. So that could show up as your husband feeling like if you try to silence him, if you're having an argument and you just want to say your piece and not let him talk, he might feel like that child who is getting shut down by his parent when he was just trying to explain himself. Or if you're sick, like I said, the example, you're sick and he feels like, oh no, this is just like when dad got really quiet and it was really scary because we didn't know what was going to happen next. And so now I'm feeling scared because my wife is being quiet and I don't know what's happened and I don't know what's going to happen next. There's so many layers to different toxic behavior that there's no way that I could possibly cover them all. These are just ones that I've seen come up in my relationship with my husband. And it's really, really hard to combat those automatic thoughts. It's really, really hard. And it's something that you both have to work on. It's something that you both need to be aware of and cognizant of so that when they come up, you know that it's really not about whatever the surface issue is. It's more like this is a default way of thinking that maybe needs some adjusting. Let me give you another example that might help you to understand this whole concept a little bit easier. Let's think about when you first started to learn how to drive. Now, for most of us, if you didn't start off driving in a golf cart or a four-wheeler or anything like that, the first time behind the wheel was probably a little intimidating. You didn't know what all the levers, what all the buttons, what everything was on the dashboard and what it meant. Slowly over time, you learn how to make a right-hand turn, make a left-hand turn. You learn how to stop. You learn how to accelerate. You learn how to do the windshield wipers. You learn how to pump the gas. You learn how to read all the gauges, which ones are super important, which ones you can, give a little bit of time before you have to deal with, those kinds of things. It takes time though. And so the first few times, or even the first dozen or so times when you're out on the road and you're driving, you're thinking about every single move you make. You're thinking about every turn, accelerating, braking, how to turn the wheel, looking around in all your mirrors, all those kinds of things, shifting if you're driving a manual transmission, all of those things. And it takes a lot of time, but eventually you get to the point where you don't have to think about it anymore. And I know that you've probably had times when you have driven somewhere and maybe it's somewhere that you go all the time. Maybe it's driving to your parish. Maybe it's driving to the grocery store and you get there and you have no recollection of how you got there. You know that you did, and you know that you're not necessarily not paying attention while you're driving, but because it's second nature, you don't even think about it. You didn't think about all the turns. You didn't think about going left at this light and right at this light and slowing down and, looking for the signs on this side of the road. No, you just go. And that's how these automatic thoughts are for all of us. When they're toxic, though, that becomes a problem because it's so much easier to just kind of live on autopilot and not really address what's going on and go back to like the learning how to drive mode than it is to just kind of coast. And so when we're dealing with these issues that we all have, I mean, yes, I talk about marrying into a toxic family dynamic, but we all have these automatic thoughts. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good. And the ones that we want to change, they're hard to do. It's hard to change. So when we face these situations with our husbands, and it seems like he has a consciousness about it, he is aware of the actual situation. For example, like whenever I'm sick, and my husband and I will have been married for 28 years coming up in just maybe a month or so. He knows that when I have a headache, when I'm not feeling well, when I'm sick, I don't talk. But for him, me not talking means I'm mad at him. He's done something wrong. He's in trouble. But that's not the case. And so even though he knows that, even though he has a conscious awareness of it, when that trigger happens, which is me being silent, he goes into a bit of a panic mode of, I've done something wrong. I need to ask. And so he will ask me, have I done anything to make you mad? Have I done anything to upset you? Did I do anything wrong? And that's not the case. It's just those thoughts that are so automatic for him that that's where his brain goes. That's where his thoughts go. And so after over 28 years of knowing each other, this is something that we still deal with. And I know that I have issues like this too, where something happens and I automatically go back to how I was trained to think as a child. Overcoming these things, like I said, is not easy. And I don't have the answers. That's a challenge to not have the answer for how to do it. But I can tell you what not to do. I can tell you that snapping back, being defensive, being ugly, that's not the solution. We have to approach these things with this knowledge now that it's not that our husbands are forgetting. It's not that there's something inherently wrong with him. It's that that's how he was trained to think. And it's kind of like when you have a dog, and let's say you get him as a rescue, and the dog behaves in ways that you don't understand. And it's because you don't know what that dog's history was. You don't know how he was treated. You don't know how his first pet parents were, his first owners were. All you got is what you can see. And so, just like it's not fair to be hurtful to a dog because of their behavior that you don't understand, it's not fair for our husbands for us to lash out and be angry at them for the way their thoughts go because that's how they were raised. I hope this gives you some insight into how to be compassionate with each other. Like I said, I know that we have our own issues as well. And so there might be some things in your life from your own childhood where things are triggering and your reaction might not necessarily fit what the trigger was. And so there might be a neural pathway in your brain that is just easier to go down that way because it's so familiar. Instead of, okay, my wife is sick. She just doesn't want to talk because maybe it hurts her throat. Or she doesn't want to talk because it takes a lot of energy and her head is hurting and she doesn't want to use that energy right now to talk. Or maybe she just doesn't have anything to say because she just doesn't feel good. We can help our husband deal with these kinds of pathways, these kinds of thoughts with as much compassion as we can give. And then we are exploring different solutions. We are talking with therapists. We are doing research. We are trying to find ways to stop going down those well-trod neural pathways and how to create and forge new ones. Dr. Caroline Leaf, an amazing author who has done a lot of research in this field, who is a Christian, I think her information, her books are a great place to start because she does come from a place of having a relationship with Christ. And so you're not going to see the weird stuff that you might find in some secular books because she does have that faith as her foundation. So I highly encourage you to pick up one of her books just to become familiar with the topic, and then talk about it with your husband. Talk about some of the things that you both see as automatic responses. Maybe you automatically thought that your husband was the one who was supposed to do all the laundry because your dad always did all the laundry. And in his family, it was his mom that did all the laundry. And so there's a conflict there. It's something weird to each of you because it's not familiar. It's not how you were raised. And so that's a very benign issue, but there are those for each of us. For us, one of the things was gift giving. We were not a big gift giving family. My family would do birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, Easter gifts, and that was pretty much it. Us kids would maybe give a card to our parents on their anniversary, and that was it. We didn't give gifts to aunts and uncles or cousins, but when I married my husband, it was like, whoa, there's a lot of expectations around gift giving. And so it was just an expectation that I think what was brought up when we did premarriage counseling. We were Baptist at the time, and we did a premarriage counseling class. And I know that came up with gift giving. But that's kind of how the whole neural pathways things work. This is an expectation that your brain has. If this happens, then we're going to go down this path. And chances are, because we're each individuals, we've got different pathways that our brains are going to go down for different triggers. So I hope this has been eye-opening for you and an encouragement for you to do a little digging and learn more about how our thoughts are formed, how they are established, and how they kind of stick around. Even if we want to change, it's really hard to change because of those physical pathways in our brains. And we have to make a conscious decision and put forth some effort to change how we think. So I encourage you, dig into this topic a little more. I hope that you will learn a little something about yourself and learn something with your husband together because, we're in this together. As a husband and wife, we are called to work together for each other's good and figuring out how each other works. I'd say that's a pretty important aspect of being married. And so I encourage you to dig a little deeper into this subject. And if you find any resources, if you know of any, please feel free to pass them on. I'd love to know because I love learning about these topics. And I would love to have other things that I can share with some of our other podcast listeners. So with that being said, I hope you have an amazing week. God bless. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. I have a free gift for you that I would love for you to get. It is my free scripts for toxic in-laws. It's a little PDF that you can use to give you some examples of how to speak to your in-laws about certain issues. I'd love to give it to you absolutely free. So if you head to desiringpeace.com/gift, it will be there waiting for you. Just enter your name and email so you can start using it for inspiration on how to talk with your toxic in-laws. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. Go to desiringpeace.com/gift to claim your gift now. Disclaimer: all content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.